Now, let's hear from two of Seven's authors, Paula Cizmar, an award-winning playwright and associate professor of theater at USC's School of Dramatic Arts, and Susan Yankowitz, a playwright, librettist, and novelist. They're joined by Marina Piskalakova-Parker, the Russian activist portrayed in Seven, and moderator Renee Jones, the executive director of the UTA Foundation and head of enrichment at United Talent Agency.
Thank you. I am honored to be here on the stage after watching that moving performance. It was very meaningful, so thank you, Marina, for being here, and I'm so honored to have Paula and Susan with us here today. So Seven was the brainchild of playwright Carol K. Mack, who says she was inspired to create the piece in 2006 after attending a Vital Voices Global Partnership meeting. For those in the audience who may be unfamiliar, can you tell us a little more about Vital Voices and the important work they're doing?
Vital Voices is an organization that is based in Washington, D.C., and they fund or provide support to women like Marina and other women all around the world and give them opportunities for training, conferences, and networking so that they can share their own methods and processes with each other.
Marina, do you want to tell how and when you became involved with Vital Voices?
Yes, I got involved with Vital Voices actually from the very beginning of, before Vital Voices became a formal organization. I attended the first Vital Voices conference in 1996 in Austria, and women from our region came to speak about women's rights there. And I remember how inspired we were when Hillary Clinton spoke there and said, democracy without women is not a democracy. And we came back really inspired with this. And also, this conference was very important because the issue of trafficking actually came to attention of Hillary Clinton and Madeleine Albright and Ukrainian women came to speak to them and started saying that women disappear from our villages. And that was the issue that I also started dealing with this, but we each thought that it's something separate in our communities and our countries, and only when we started talking among ourselves there, we realized that actually it's a global issue. So, and then when Vital Voices, actually it was very interesting process because initially it was part of the State Department initiative to provide a platform for women to share best practices, to have a discussion. But then they asked us, do you want this really to continue? Do you want an NGO? And I was among 25 women leaders that came together. And we said, yes, we want an NGO because we need this platform to continue. And it's unique because it's really uniting women leaders, emerging leaders. Because when I started, I didn't have training. I didn't know how to write a proposal. I didn't know how to mainstream the issue. And all the training that I've got, all the ideas from women that exist in the global network, all of that really helped me to do everything I'm doing in Russia today.
Wonderful. So Paula and Susan, when and how did each one of you get involved in the project?
I think we sort of got involved in the same way and at the same time. After Carol Mack got the idea that she decided that she would find 6 other playwrights who could each have one woman to write about. And she picked Paula, she picked me and the other women who were represented on the program. And Vital Voices then offered us an enormous book of women throughout the world who were doing all of these extremely important work. And to some degree, we each were able to choose within limits the figure we wanted to write about.
One of the things that united most of us, I think, was that we were all produced by the Women's Project, which was founded by Julia Miles in New York. And it's the theater that was fostering the new work and development of new plays by women and productions of women. So that's where I first met Carol. That's where Anna met her. I think you did too.
No, I actually had never met Carol before, but we had a friend in common. That was Gerda, Gerda Stevenson, who did the first workshop of it, and
Carol was pretty
introduced
much in tune with which women were writing plays that were politically engaged, and so I think that's one of the reasons that she asked us. But the thing that we did try to figure out when we were selecting the various women that we would interview was how can we get a sampling of people from different parts of the globe. So that was one of the criteria. But then the fortuitous thing for me was that since I'm the only Californian, everyone else is in New York except for Ruth, who's in Chicago, was that I found out that Marina frequently came to California. So that made it a lot easier for me to interview her. So that was, in addition to the fact that we're both Slavic, I think the reason that I selected her.
And when you were writing the piece, were you aware that it was going to be woven in together, or were you thinking about just telling the story? Tell us a little bit about the process.
We each interviewed the woman that we had decided to write about. So I interviewed Mukhtar Mai, and you interviewed Marina, and each of us interviewed and then wrote a monologue. The monologues exist in the form of monologues, and then several of us got together and tried to figure out some coherent way in which to braid the interviews together, or chunks of the interviews together.
But to be honest, from the very beginning, we honestly did not know what shape it would take. Originally, it might have just been a collection of monologues. In fact, we didn't really have a plan at the beginning. It was one of those things where we knew this was an extremely important thing to do. We knew that the work of these women was extremely important. So we were going to interview them, but beyond that, we did not know the shape it would take. And then once we had done the collection of interviews, we realized we wanted it to be a unified piece rather than just a series of monologues, which would take about 8 hours to perform anyway.
We tried it.
We did try that,
but
right.
it didn't. But yeah, I think that was a major consideration. But also, I think we wanted to show the overlaps and the intersections among the different women, despite the fact that they all had different missions, that they came from different parts of the globe. But there are themes that just kept on echoing. So it made it, we felt it made it a much stronger and more resonant piece.
Once we had done the first interviews, because there were interviews that happened after the very first raw draft of the monologues that we created, we all actually got together at Susan Yankowitz's house in New York City, and we read the preliminary monologues that we had created for each of the women. And none of us had gotten together and planned what we were going to say. But after we heard these original raw drafts of the monologues that we had done, we started to hear certain patterns in the work that everyone was doing and certain images. There was a lot of walking, which came up, and there were certain resonances of things that everybody had felt about humanity or input that they had gotten from their family that started to give us ideas of how to weave things.
Great. Marina, in the play, you are brutally honest about your experience, whether it be the sudden death of your husband to your son being threatened. What is it like for you to relive these experiences on stage and know that this is, being performed around the world?
Oh, tough question. Right after the performance, was finished today, I said to both Paula and Susan, you wrote such a powerful play that so many years later, and I've seen it so many times, I still cry. It's tough. It's tough reliving it, not just for myself. Sorry. But I terribly miss Inez McCormack, who is not with us anymore.
Her story was Northern Ireland?
Yes, Northern Ireland. She was an amazing person and a very close friend of mine. The first, at the premiere, we were sitting and holding hands the whole time. After that, we went to her room at the hotel in New York, and we spoke until 5 a.m, just reliving it, because these women are not just characters, leaders, but we know each other very closely. We went through similar struggles. And that this play is so unique because it's not our personal stories, it's a woman's story. It's a story of a woman activist in any country, in any society. And when I can go beyond my personal story, then I can see the brilliance of that. And I can see how important it is to tell this. It is important for societies to realize how difficult it is actually to go against a culture. That women, human rights defenders, are always under double threat. It's the government that suppresses, but it's also just the society that rejects change. Patriarchal society is very rigid and doesn't want to change. And I think in the current situation, in many countries, there is a huge backlash where we actually need stories like that to keep examples of it's doable. Yes, we make a lot of sacrifice, we suffer, but in every community there are women like me, like Muhtar, like others, and we need just to remember that. It's not just women coming from other countries, it's somebody in your neighborhood. And it is important to find out who it is and support them so that they are not isolated when they are working and overcoming a lot of difficulties.
Thank you for that. Susan, tell us a little bit about Mukhtar Mai and what she is doing today. Is she still working in the schools? Are you still in touch? Can you tell us?
I am somewhat in touch with her. Mukhtar does speak a little English now, but she doesn't speak a great deal, and she doesn't write a great deal.
Can you tell us how your process was?
Yes,
that?
I will. Yeah. So I interviewed her through an interpreter. Always, there was always somebody there. For most of the time, it was a cousin of hers, and so I would ask a question. She would, it would be translated and come back. It took quite a while, but you can also tell a great deal about a person by sitting in the same room and watching the way the faces move, watching the expressions, the laugh, the time. For instance, Mukhtar really did not want to talk about the rape itself. It was something she really just skimmed over. It was still very painful to her. So I interviewed her, I think it was 3 times.
In Pakistan?
No, always here in D.C. and then also in New York. And I had no idea what she would think of the material at all, but she came, all the women came, right? The first night at the Y, everybody came, and she loved it, and she sat there seeing herself depicted at her cousin sitting next to her, telling her what was being said in her voice.
That sounds really powerful. So Seven premiered in New York in 2008. Are you still
I'm in
touch?
touch with Mukhtar, and I can tell that she just issued a book called In the Name of Honor.
Oh, yeah.
And she wrote her story, and also we are friends on Facebook, so I can follow her work. She's very actively involved. She describes some cases that she does on Facebook. There was a time she had sort of a break, but now she's very active again. And I also want to say that about Mukhtar, when we met in Deauville in France, she gave me a shawl and she said, "This is my embroidery." And I was wearing some jacket I bought in Nepal, and she said, "I do this kind of embroidery." And then when we were sitting in her room at the hotel, I asked her, "What do you do when you get tired?" She said, "I dance." I said, "Funny, I do that too." And that's things that, how do we cope with when we don't have energy? What do we do? How do we recharge? And it's funny because a lot of us, we do the same. And we found out it again through communication already through Seven.
It's wonderful.
And let me just add one thing. Mukhtar has built several more schools in her area, and she has built at least one hospital and lots of roads so that people can get from their villages to the schools and to the hospital. She is also married now with 2 little children.
It's wonderful.
Yeah.
It's also important to remember that the stories are frozen in about 2008. Mm-hmm. So these women have gone on to keep working since then.
Absolutely. And speaking of that, in 2008, in the play, you mentioned that there were 160 crisis centers, shelters, and organizations dedicated to violence against women in Russia. What does that number look like now?
Well, it's about the same again because the situation in Russia is very challenging at the moment, especially with domestic violence. Last year, we were able to finally push for legislative change and make domestic violence or violence in intimate relationship criminal, starting with the first physical assault. And yesterday, Russian parliament reverted back legislation and decriminalized domestic violence. My organization is now on the list of the foreign agent law. The foreign agent law is the law that was introduced in Russia in 2012 for organizations that receive funding from abroad and involved in political activities. It means that basically it's like putting a stigma on people working with political issues and receiving foreign funding, undermining our commitment, our motivation, saying it looks like, okay, these people, they do it because somebody paid them from abroad to do that. And that's why they go against our traditional values. That's the situation we are now in Russia. And because of that, some organizations are getting closed. Some organizations not shut down, but really decrease activities. So we are in a new level of struggle at the moment. It's not less challenging than being alone on the helpline. It's a different type of challenge now.
Right. Well, it sounds familiar. So the way, for those who are listening and were not able to see the visuals, at the end of 7 today, we saw images of the women's marches that were all over the world. And it feels now more than ever this message is relevant. How I would love for each of you just to comment how you felt when you first either you participated or saw those images. What kind of meaning did that have for you?
I was thrilled. I was afraid that there would just be a handful of women who would show up in Washington, D.C. and New York, and I knew there would be a lot in Los Angeles. I'm very proud that Los Angeles actually had the largest march around the world. I didn't get a chance to participate in Los Angeles. I participated in San Luis Obispo, where there were 10,000 people on the streets, which is pretty amazing considering that the population is only 45,000, although the county has 200,000. Of course, it is a college town. And I feel as if people are basically saying, we are not going to stand for this. We're not going to take no for an answer, and we are not going backwards. So I believe that it has to be grassroots. We are unfortunately going to have to spend our time resisting every single day.
I don't have anything more eloquent than that to say. I agree.
It was beautifully said. And where were you at the time?
Well, I was here. I didn't participate, but I was watching it, and I can tell, because we are organizing our own march protest in Russia at the moment, and I can tell you, I was telling Paula and Susan before, it's the first time when the initiative of organizing protests against decriminalization of domestic violence in Russia is not coming from us. It's independent women, just regular women, who filed a petition for the protest and started a campaign on Facebook. And I was thrilled because it's really good to feel that it comes from women themselves, that women have enough voice and confidence now to initiate that. And now the march in the U.S. was a great example, great role model to follow. And we started collecting now. The first march was planned actually for today in Russia, but Moscow government refused. They didn't allow us to do that. And in Russia, there is a law that doesn't allow unsanctioned meetings. Basically, you cannot, if a group of people go and protest in a group against the parliament, for example, people get arrested. So there were women who went on single pickets against decriminalization of domestic violence. And now we are trying to organize a march. Women from all over the country are planning to come to Moscow. And we are trying to get women to tell their stories. And I think the march, Women's March in the U.S. was not just great inspiration, but also it's a great example how women can put together. Actually, in our case, it's also men and women, like here. I think it's the issue that it's not just, like Laura said in the play, it's not just women's issue, it's society issue. So we need men and women together do that. But we also had a solidarity marches in Poland and in Armenia of women in solidarity with Russia. So I think the march, the march in the U.S. and the solidarity marches around the globe now launched like a chain effect where whatever happens in one of our countries, other countries support. So we support each other.
That's wonderful to hear. Have you ever considered, Marina, running for office?
I was offered that once, and I gave a good thought to that. Because, and I realized at that point that in order to do what I do, I have to stay independent. I cannot belong to a system because in Russia, this system is not the one that would allow to bring all the changes that I want to have in Russia. So I will stay independent.
That's a tough choice. So I want to turn it over to our playwrights. And just from my world, content and storytelling is basically, the most effective way of getting your message out and telling a story. But why do you feel theater was the best way to get these women's stories out?
As opposed to?
A film or some other form.
I think one of the wonderful and unique things about theater is that you are in the same space. You are all breathing the same air, and there is something much more urgent and personal about it. I think you could have a film, but the screen is a kind of, what's the word that I want here? But it's sort of a barrier, even though it might be, just something that you can see through and into. But you don't feel that kind of connection, I think, that you do in theater. Theater seems like the right place for it.
When you also think about it, it's a very portable medium, and it's cheap. And that was one of the things that was necessary for us. None of us had the money to make a film, and I don't think any of us wanted to fundraise, but it didn't really cost any of us much to actually do an interview. It cost time, it cost energy, and it cost blood, I will tell you that, but it didn't cost money. So time, energy, and blood is what we have. But the other thing about it is, what we didn't realize when we wrote this piece was that it not only would be done all around the world, but it would be done in tiny little communities. One of my very favorite productions of this play was in Prescott, Arizona, and it was just organized by a group of women, just kind of on an ad hoc basis. And since there isn't much of an Asian population in Prescott, Arizona, the casting of Musokua was kind of difficult. But the organizer of the whole thing was at Costco one day, saw an Asian American woman in the store, ran up to her, said, "Would you like to be in a play?" And, the Costco was 40 miles from Prescott, so it was, dicey if, the woman was even in the vicinity. And she said, "Well, I've never done that before." And she said, "Well, just come on and join us." And she did. And it was just amazing that these women just presented this play, because you can. You don't really need to be an actor to do it. It's also been done by male politicians, which is really interesting, and male generals in
NATO.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's portable. It can be done in everyone's living room. In fact, we encourage that every March. We have something called the March to March, and we actually encourage people to just buy a copy of the play and read it in your living room, or invite friends.
And to that ending note, what I would love to ask each of you to say is, those who do get to experience it, whether it be Los Angeles, Prescott, anywhere in the world, what would you like them to take back to their communities? Start with Marina.
Well, I think what I've learned, I often spoke after the plays in different countries, different communities. As Paula said, it would be at the big institution in The Hague, or it could be in a small Swedish community in a small town. But I think in The Hague, it was the Social Institute, I think it's called. There were a lot of students, and I asked the moderator, "Can I ask a question?" Because usually we asked questions. And I was really curious. I asked the audience, students, I said, "How did it change you? What happened?" And there was a young man who said to me, I will never look at my sister and my mom the same way. I've learned a lot. And I think this is important. Another thing is, as I said earlier, it is important to remember that activists like us, they're in every community. And they need support. They need support of their community, because change is, one person can only initiate change, but it comes when a lot of people start getting this awareness and really paying attention to what is happening or something wrong is happening there, and when the whole community wants to change it. So I think it is important to just pay attention not to what is happening in Pakistan, Russia, or any other country, but in your own backyard as well.
I think it's also this notion that sort of is a theme of the play, that everybody finds a voice in which to struggle, a struggle and a voice in which to do it. And I think that the idea that that we each individually, each of these women were individuals, and they went out on limb and gave all of themselves to it and were able to succeed to a large degree. I think it's that each of us has that power.
And I would just echo that and say that it's my hope that people get energized by the piece and become active if they aren't already active. And if they are active, then, to keep the faith. The activism creates community. And we saw a big example of that with the women's marches. But you can see really important, smaller examples of that, even in just smaller groups of people who get together and basically say, we have to make some change, and so we will.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Paula and Susan, for your work. And thank you, Marina, for everything you have done. You're a role model to all of us. Thank you.